I'm sitting in my hometown, Amsterdam, with American author David Allen, who wrote the bestseller, Getting Things Done, GTD. David and his wife, Catherine, have been living in Amsterdam since 2014, and every now and then they visit my concerts. David's method, Getting Things Done, or GTD, has made the life of millions of people so much easier. And I'm so excited to talk to him about his great method. And especially I would like to know how musicians can apply this method to their daily, often irregular and chaotic life without having the feeling or even the fear, which is a big problem, that it will harm their creative process. David, it's such an honor. I play with a lot of music artists who have millions of streams on Spotify, but I've never spoken to an author who sold millions of books. Thank you for your time.
Oh, my pleasure, Mike. And I so appreciate your invitation because I love the arts. I love musicians. I've dabbled with piano, bass guitar, flute, over the years. And in my life, though I'm hardly an expert in any of those, I'm sort of a jack of all instruments, if you will. But I love the idea of working with people in the, quote, creative areas. Now, everybody's creative, but, especially if you're talking about musicians, that's a world people would consider the creative environment. And what's fascinating is, again, there's kind of an allergy for a lot of creative people, and getting organized is going to stifle my spontaneity and my creativity. And actually, it's just the opposite. I ask people what they love to do. They say, I don't want to get organized. That's too much structure. I say, well, what do you love to do? I love to paint. Show me your paintbrushes. Neat as a pin. Right. See, you actually don't think about getting organized about something you love to do because you get organized so you can do it. Ask a golfer. Look at their golf clubs. All right. Neat as a pin. So, I have the sort of the funny saying. I say, well, if you don't like structure, what do you think about the center line in the highway? It's a constraint. It's structure. It gives you limits. Oh, my God. But what if that wasn't there? You'd be worried about being hit by somebody you don't know, whatever. You couldn't let your mind drift off to other things while you're riding on the highway. So much in the same way, appropriate structure, not too much, but just enough so it gives you the freedom to be as creative as you want to be. You don't get that for free.
How did you develop your amazing methods? What's your background?
Well, let me admit right now, I have no formal traditional education in business psychology or time management. Everything I came up with, street smarts, was all just from my own experience. But I had so many jobs. I didn't know what I wanted to do when I grew up, Mike. I was into, I dropped out of graduate school. This is Berkeley, 1968. Right. I dropped out of graduate school to go find myself, discover God, truth, and the universe. Right. So I hopped onto a pretty serious self-exploration game. So meditation, spiritual practices, got a black belt in the martial arts. But they don't pay people to do that. So I had to make a living. So I had some friends that kind of knew what they were doing. They had some small businesses and some starting up their own sort of business and professional worlds, but they needed some help. So I became a really good number two guy. So I'd walk in and look at what they were doing and say, how could I help? And they say, well, look around. And, Mike, I'm Mr. Lazy. I'm the laziest guy you ever met. That's how I came up with this stuff. I hate wasting time and being inefficient. And that's just silly. Anyway, I'd look at what they were doing and say, God, how much easier could we do this? So I'd help them, improve the way they were doing stuff. Now they call that process improvement. Back then it was just, I'm lazy. Can we get out of here earlier? So I would help them improve their system, and then got improved and they'd get bored. Well, let me go find another job. So I go find another job and do the same thing. At some point I discovered they pay people to do that. They call them something. Consultant. Oh my God.
You were pioneering being a consultant.
Yeah, I thought, oh my God, you mean I could actually make a living just project by project, keeping myself interested and not getting bored. by having all these different experiences. And so I haven't stopped then. That was like 50 years ago, right? So hung out my shingle, Allen Associates, and decided to start working with people with whatever they needed as best I could come up with that. But I said, okay, I need some models about this, but also at the same time, because of my background with meditation practices, particularly the martial arts, I discovered the value of clear space in your head, not being distracted so you could really highly focus with full attention. And a lot of karate had a lot to do with focus, full attention on something. And also, Mike, if 4 people jump you in a dark alley, you don't want 2,000 unprocessed emails hanging around your psyche, right? You need to be clear, and then clear, and then clear, and then clear, and you need to be able to refocus rapidly, on whatever the next thing is. And so as my life, my consulting practice starting to get better and better and busier, it was starting to screw up clear space in my head. So just for myself personally, I kept looking and being hungry for what are techniques that can keep me clear and in control and focused while my life gets busier and busier. So I started to piece together sort of piece by piece. I didn't wake up one morning with this whole methodology as some big epiphany. It was a long string of epiphanettes, as I say. Got a little piece here, a little piece there, started to integrate those. They work. And pretty soon it became kind of a whole mix of sort of a whole methodology. I wouldn't have called it that then, but a set of best practices that I was using for myself. But then I turned around and started to use those with my clients, and by gosh, produced the same results for them it did for me. More control, more focus, more clarity, more space in their head to focus on the meaningful stuff that made difference to them. So I went, wow. So that became a lot of the sort of the grist for the mill. That became a lot of the sort of core of what we didn't call it coaching back then, but I was just mostly consulting to business owners, small and medium-sized businesses. And that just became a lot of what I was doing, professionally. And then a guy in the big corporate training world, head of human resources in a big corporation, saw what I was doing and said, David, we need those things in our whole culture. Can you design some sort of a training around what you've come up with? So maybe we could reach a lot more people than just one-on-one. So I designed a training. We did a pilot program for 1,000 executives and managers at Lockheed in 1983, 84 in California, and it hit a nerve. It suddenly was their most successful training that they did. And you could have fooled me as an American history major in graduate school in Berkeley if you'd told me that I was going to be in the corporate training world. I'd have said, well, what are you smoking? Come on. Who are you kidding? But it turned out that was the ripest audience for what I'd come up with. They were the people starting to get hit with the tsunami of email, and corporate change and flattened organizations and so forth. And a lot of those folks were hungry for assistance and how could they stay afloat in the world that was rapidly changing around them. And so that became a lot of what I started to do. I sort of moved into the corporate training world and then spent the next 10 or 20 years training hundreds of thousands of people, mostly American corporations, with a training around what this methodology was and refining it in the meantime. And a lot of what my consulting had been turned into coaching one-on-one with some of the mid to senior level people because they wanted, David, how do I set this up personally? And I would sit literally desk side with them and walk them through the implementation of this methodology for them personally. So I've literally spent my thousands of hours one-on-one with some of the best, brightest, busiest people you'd ever meet on the planet, refining and testing this methodology out. And it took me that long. Jesus, it took me 20 years to figure out what I'd figured out. And then nobody else seemed to have figured it out the way I did. And that it was bulletproof. You couldn't punch a hole in it. Anybody start to implement any of this methodology, it automatically gave them more control, more focus, more ability to focus on cool stuff. So that became a whole lot of what my world was about. At some point, somebody said, David, you ought to write the book. So I went, gee, I wonder how you write a book. So I read 3 books about how you write a book. And while I was working full-time, boy, talk about stress. It was 4 years from 1997 till I published the first edition of Getting Things Done in 2001. Wow. But that I wrote it, and I wrote it mainly just to get it out of my head and just to write a manual in case I got run over by a bus. Said, well, at least somebody could pick up this manual and figure out how to do it. But I didn't know if they would. I didn't know if anybody would care about it or whatever. Anyway, so turns out the book was quite a success, became a bestseller, right off. Fast forward 30 languages, 3 million copies and, out there. And you could have fooled me, but at some point we said, I guess I can scale this and I don't have to be around personally to be able to share this life-changing stuff that does nothing but improve people's lives, if they implement any of it. So that then became a lot of what my world, was about.
And do you have other people teaching this method?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we do now. That's a lot of how we decided to scale this was how do we train other people to be able to train this? So certifying people who could then, we could trust, could deliver trainings like we were and deliver coaching one-on-one. So we now have, hundreds of people around the world that we've certified to do this stuff. And we've now built a licensing, sort of an IP licensing company. So we now have, we're now represented in about 80 or 90 countries by licensees who bought the ability to be able to then deliver this and train their own trainers in this methodology. So we've been able to, the last 15 or 20 years, we've been able to actually now scale this globally.
And how do you manage the quality control with these people?
Yeah, well, that's always a challenge. How do you do that? Well, first of all, we don't have a mail order certification. It's very rigorous. You actually have to demonstrate that you actually do this methodology and understand it before you even come close to being certified. And there's quite a rigorous certification process where you have to then, train and then send us evaluations for that. Once you coach, you send us evaluations for that. And, we still have our partner. She's in Medellin. She's actually visiting with us now here in Amsterdam.
Colombia.
Yeah.
I was playing there 4 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Can you believe it?
Yeah. No, Ana Maria's. Huh. She lives in Medellin. And anyway, she still checks all of that. And mostly the people attracted to doing this work are already really, really cool people to begin with. The strange paradox about this, Mike, is that the people most attracted to what this methodology is need it the least. They're already the most organized. They're already the most aware of the value of system. They already know they could produce value because they already have. They already know, that they could do more if they had more room. That's their issue. They, a lot of them are just filled up. They don't have a room to add more value, but they know they could if they had more of a capability. So that means I get to deal with some of the coolest people you can imagine that are attracted to us and come to us.
And they find you. You don't need to find them.
I don't know how to market. Never marketed at all. All we did was pick up the phone, So, yes, it's a good idea to make sure that your brand works. And we've had to, really work to make sure we protect our trademarks and our brand out there so the brand doesn't get tarnished. Because there are a lot of pirates out there that say, "Oh, I can do GTD," and they pretend they can do it, and then they would sully the brand. So we have to monitor that.
Do the cultural differences play a big role in people's life in applying this method?
Not really. There's more of a difference between you and your next door neighbor than there is between you and somebody in China doing this. Yeah. It's more what's your personal interest in having more control, more fluidity, more freedom in your professional and personal life. And that's universal. I've done this personally. I've delivered programs in Hong Kong and Sydney and Mexico City and France and all over. It's all the same thing. For the people that are interested at this level of game, it's pretty universal. It's worldwide. There's really no difference. There's slight little differences in terms of just style or stylistic. A lot of the Southern European countries, it's kind of like the manana. Yeah, we don't need to be more organized. Oh my God! But there's a whole lot of them that do and know that. That's how they build Maseratis, and that's how they make good French clothing, and so there's still a tier of people in every single culture that is hungry for this.
When it comes to music, it's like everybody in the world loves ice cream.
Yeah.
But if it comes to like organizing concerts, to give you an example, like Latin America, Brazil, I was at Schiphol Airport traveling to Brazil, and they called me for an extra concert 2 days after, and it was sold out. Whereas if you want to play in Germany or anywhere in Western Europe or Scandinavia, the things are being planned ahead like 2 years in advance.
Yeah.
You see, So music, there are some cultural differences.
I'll bet.
Yeah.
Speaking of music, you probably, since you have musicians that probably are listening to this,
Yes.
one of my best and most interesting clients that really bought into my stuff was a guy named Evan Taubenfeld. And Evan was Avril Lavigne's guitarist and producer and boyfriend for a while. And he caught on to my stuff and blew him away. And then he started, writing his own songs, doing his own albums, had his own band in L.A. And he started using a lot of this. He would, like one of the techniques, and we haven't talked about what are some of the basic parts of the methodology, but one of them is capture. You got an idea, capture it. Don't leave it in your head. Get it out of your head. And so one of the things he did was this was at the time of BlackBerry, so he had a little BlackBerry that he would carry around with me during the week, and then he would just have these weird song ideas or melody ideas, and he would just capture them right then. And then on the weekend, what he would do is play all that stuff back and grab the stuff that was really good. A lot of it wasn't, but who knows? You get all kinds of ideas. I mean, the best way to have a good idea is to have lots of ideas.
Yeah,
right.
But he captured it,
But he captured all that stuff, and then he curated all that stuff. Which one worked, which one didn't work. Also, when he was working with his band, he said some of his best ideas for different songs came up while they were trying to cut another song, right in the middle of it. So what he did was in his studio, put up a big whiteboard, and whenever a new thing would show up while they were doing something else, he'd go, stop. Everything would stop, and he'd go up and they'd capture something about that on the whiteboard. And he said that they were able to produce an album, 3 times as fast as they ever had before, simply because they didn't lose any good ideas that showed up along the way, had a way to capture that and then curate them into whatever might show up as with something that had value to it.
What a fantastic example to apply GTD.
Yeah, oh, absolutely, for sure.
Most musicians tend to be chaotic. How do you get musicians to apply this method or get organized in the first place?
Well, the first thing is to say, organize what? So that's why the capture is such a critical step. What do they need to get organized? Look, if you were totally disorganized, you couldn't get out of bed. So everybody's got some sort of a system. Otherwise, they wouldn't be up and around and alive and doing any kind of work. So they all have some sort of a system. It's just most people have a huge improvement opportunity in terms of that system itself. So, and unfortunately, Mike, most people are trying to use their head as their office. And your head, pardon my French, is a shitty office.
Yes.
Your brain did not evolve to remember, remind, prioritize, or manage relationships between more than, guess how many things, which have been proven by cognitive science now? 4. That's it. As soon as you've got more than 4 things banging around in your brain, you're not going to play music as well. You're not going to be as present with friends as well. You're not going to, you're trying to use your head as your office. It's a terrible office. You need to get all that stuff out. Then you can start to see what the content is that I then need to be more organized about. Until you do that, there's no reason to get organized. All you got to do is rearrange incomplete piles of unclear things. And that doesn't work. That's why most people don't like being organized, because most organization systems suck. They don't work because they don't capture everything to begin with. They don't go through a rigorous curation process of, wait a minute, is this a real thing? Am I going to do something about this? Or is this trash? Or is this reference that I might produce that song later on when I do a next album, which is on hold? Or is this something I need to move on or do something with right now? And if it is, what would I need to do next about this? Do I need to talk to somebody about this? Do I need to just do some riffing on the piano about this? Do I need to record something and see what it sounds like? What do I need to do next about that thing? And by the way, if that thing represents something that you can't complete in just one sitting or one action, what's your project? Do an album, to get ready for a concert, to,
book a tour.
Any of that. Those are projects. And a project is just some outcome you want to achieve that's going to take more than one act step to get there, that you need to keep somehow in front of you on some consistent basis, saying, how am I doing? I'm like, oh, God, that reminds me, I ought to. Oh, yeah, I need to, about that. So you start to handle these things before they get into crisis mode.
Yeah.
So that's, you don't need to get organized if you don't need to get organized. So why not? Just bang around, see what shows up, see if life works for you that way. Just be kind of zen about it and say, look, if I'll do it if it shows up. If it doesn't, I'll just do whatever's next, or I'm just going to do nothing. By the way, how well you do my methodology is how easily you can do nothing.
Mm-hmm.
So you can only feel good about what you're not doing when you know what you're not doing.
Because I encounter a lot of resistance among musicians, especially because there is this big fear, like, if I'm going to get organized, if I'm going to take care of the music business and all of that, is going to harm my creative process.
Mm-hmm.
That's the biggest problem.
Yeah. Well, grow up.
Yes. Yeah. And that's what I say. You have to acknowledge that you're a one-man enterprise as a musician.
Yeah.
If you want to have a serious career in music. I always say to my students, a successful career in music is 200%. It's 100% great artistry, great playing, whatever you do. And the other 100% is the mentality. And if the mentality sucks, you can be an incredible musician, but it's not going to work. And
Well, it's funny, Mike. People meet me and they say, God, David, you're nothing like I thought you were going to be. Because they'd read my book or whatever. They thought I was going to be corporate, buttoned down, anal retentive, tight-assed, whatever. And they meet me and they say, God, you're nothing like that. I say, no, I'm not. As a matter of fact, I like being spontaneous, following my intuitive hunches, and don't fence me in and plan as little as I get by with. That's how I came up with this methodology. So I had the freedom to do that.
Many musicians also handle roles like marketing, booking, etc. And how can they manage these multiple roles without burning out? Thank you for listening. If you enjoy my podcast, then please subscribe, leave a rating and a review. Please visit my website, mikedelferro.com, where you also will find links to my other podcast, Self-Management for Musicians. You will also find links to my music and my socials. And of course, please share this podcast with anyone interested. Nothing beats the word of mouth. Thank you.
Well, it's a good question. And a lot of entrepreneurs, especially in the startup world, have to wear all those hats. They have to be party person. They have to count pennies. And those all require different kinds of mindsets to be able to do each one of them. So it's nice if you can isolate those. And, one of the exercises, certainly as a consultant years ago, I would have people sort of write their own org chart. Here's all the sales and PR stuff I have to do. Here's all the finance stuff I have to do. Here's all the operational stuff I have to do. Here's all the admin stuff I have to do. And as soon as you can kind of isolate those as separate hats to wear, then you can put on one hat at a time and say, okay, now that I've got my finance hat on, what do I need to do? How is that going? I need to do X, Y, Z about my bank account or about a credit line or about payroll or whatever it is. And so if you could isolate each one of those and then sort of, step within that little silo and then think through, what do I need to do about this thing to get to the outcome I need? Well-managed finances. What do I need to do about marketing and PR to get to interested people in what I'm doing? What do I need to do about operations to make sure I'm delivering the product people are buying, out there? Or the things that I want to express myself, out there. And so being able to sort of isolate those as separate mindsets makes it a lot easier. And that makes that means it's a lot easier to do that if you go through what I've mentioned before. You get all this stuff out of your head and say, well, that's my finance stuff. That's my PR stuff. That's my operational stuff. That helps a lot if you can just sort of categorize these things into their different tints, if you will. It makes it a lot easier than trying to mix them all together and assume you're trying to do all of that all the time. And again, that's because people are trying to use their head as their office to manage all that. And the problem is any one of those will wake you up at 3 o'clock in the morning when you can't do spit about it. And that's the whole thing, is your mind doesn't have one. Like, if it did, it would only remind you of stuff when you could do stuff about it.
Yeah, and when you wake up at 3 in the morning, you never see a solution.
Well, you might. There's a possibility you might, as long as you went to bed with the desire or the intention to have a solution. Many times sleeping on something will give you the best idea when you wake up, because it lets your unconscious sort of knit stuff together, because it goes past your conscious conditioning. And it makes connections that you may not make before. So I wouldn't negate the idea that sleeping on stuff might not solve some stuff. I'm sure you've had good musical ideas that just showed up at the weirdest times or whatever.
True.
And right. And that's great. That's a lot of, how that works. There is no sense of past or future there. It's all called now, and what's now, what's going on now, what's got my attention now. But, I would say, what has your attention? And sometimes you don't know what has your attention, and you need to sit down and just fumble with stuff, or play solitaire, or go ding around, with the right hand on their piano, and then see what shows up. Because many times that's where the creativity comes. It's once you start being creative, then that gives you then more creative ideas. So many times the big key is just to get going, and be willing to have a shitty first draft. But
you know what I find so fascinating? I'm a huge fan of Eckhart Tolle. The main thing he emphasizes on is the presence. And what I find so interesting is that your method, despite it, it's like a task thing, and at the same time, it's so being present.
Yeah. Well, unless you're managing tasks appropriately, you can't be present.
Yeah.
And by the way, the people who are most into being are very doing people. Just look at them.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So being and doing are not opposites. Actually, one is sort of required for the other to be elegant. To elegantly be, you need to elegantly do, or be willing to elegantly do, as your beingness, motivates you or gives you the impulses to do it. But you can't stop having intentionality here. If you're in the material world, you're teleological. You can't stop focusing. You can't stop wanting to do something. If nothing else, go to the bathroom. You can't, you're always going somewhere. So at least, in the material world, in the spiritual worlds, it's a little different. But here, you're always going somewhere. And so all my methodology is getting you appropriately engaged, so it's not distracting you from being present. Are you appropriately engaged with your cat? Are you appropriately engaged with your piano? Is it in tune, right? And are you appropriately engaged with your partner? Are you appropriately engaged with a concert? Are you, and appropriate engagement doesn't mean you finish these things. It just means you've identified what they are, decided what needs to be done about them, if anything, park the results somewhere that you know that you'll be reminded of it at the right time and in the right context, off your mind. So people say, David, how organized you get? I say, as organized as I need to be to have nothing on my mind.
Most musicians, they have like a favorite part of the day where they are artistically most inspired. In my experience, most musicians are evening people like myself. I noticed that if they would sacrifice those moments for, let's say, the business part of music, they end up being frustrated because they haven't dedicated enough time to their instrument or their creative process or whatever, they're writing, whatever you do. What's your take on this?
Yeah, I think that's probably true, but I think, to your point, it's quite individual for each individual person, what works for them and what doesn't. So learning where your best rhythms are. Sometimes it's best to handle all the stuff you just don't feel like handling first thing, so that you could snack on email the rest of the day and, play with your piano the rest of the day. Get the stuff out of your head. A big champion of my stuff, who was probably one of the most successful producers in Hollywood, said, after he read my book, he said, I really got it. And some people say, well, what you should do is the highest priority first. And he said, no, what I do first is what's most fun. Because when he does what's most fun, that gives him energy to then maybe do some of the other stuff that doesn't seem to be so much fun, but now I've got the confidence and now I've got my juice going, and so whatever. And some people say, no, wait to save your fun stuff as reward for doing the hard stuff. So that's as individual. I do both. It depends on the day. It depends on what time of day. I'm maybe a weird duck, but I plan as little as I can get by with. I try to just be present with what do I feel like doing right now. And, we all have a whole committee inside of us. Somebody wants to eat and procreate, and another part of you wants to, change the world. And another part of you wants to, be a world-class musician. And those are all, sometimes the people in my inner committee are throwing plates at each other.
Yeah.
So trying to figure out, okay, which voice do I need to listen to right now? But ultimately, the only way you can set your priority is pay attention to your intuition. Now, the truth is, a lot of people couldn't tell the difference between intuition and indigestion. Does this feeling mean I should do this, or too much chili I had for lunch? So, to know the difference, you need to know yourself pretty well. And it's also really good to use the methodology to get as clear as you can about all the things that have your attention, so you can start to pay attention to what has your attention. But that's hard to do if you've got so many things that are distracting you.
Yeah, and an endless to-do list.
Yeah, well, you're not going to stop a to-do list till you die, and even then, probably not. Again, you're teleological. You can't. If you finished everything on your list, you get so excited, you create a bigger list. So give it up. So yeah, and it's like a menu. I mean, I don't order everything on the menu. I pick one thing, even if it's a big menu. So task list should just be a menu where you say, okay, here are my options about what I could do right now. Which one of those will give me the highest payoff, or be the most fun, or make the biggest difference in whatever it is I'm trying to do? And that's all just an intuitive judgment. But that could be different at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, given how you feel, than it is at 10 o'clock in the morning.
Again, presence.
Yeah. Nothing beats being present.
Tell me about your next book, your new book.
New book. It's called Team, Getting Things Done with Others. It's filling in a big gap, Mike, because after all these years, people would get our stuff and go and make them personally highly productive, but then they walk back into dysfunctional environments. That then they have to use their own personal productivity to build walls around themselves so they're not infected by everybody else's dysfunction. So people have often said, gee, David, how do I get people around me to get this? It would make life and work so much easier. And I never had the bandwidth or the ability to really be able to frame that appropriately. And so my partner in the UK, Ed Lamont, we're having lunch together here in Amsterdam three years ago, I guess. And he challenged me. He said, David, I think we could fill in that blank. So I said, okay, let's try. So we wrote the book about a manual, really, about all the functional and dysfunctional things that go on in teams. And a team could be you and your taxi driver, it could be you and your board, it could be you and anybody that you're in a relationship with to get anything done together is a team. So, and there are a lot of people in high-performing teams already, but they don't know how they did that, and they couldn't recreate it if they had to because they don't know what are the pieces. So we dissected all the pieces, best practices and dysfunctional practices that can occur when you're trying to get things done with other people, and basically the cures for those things. So not everybody needs everything in that book, but it's a fabulous manual, for teams or anybody who engages with other people. And I don't care how much of an individual musician or artist you are, you're still going to need to work with other people to get your music out, to get to express yourself, to get, to get any kind of value in the world out there from what you're doing. So knowing how to work with somebody else appropriately there are keys in this book coming.
Thank you so much for this great interview and this valuable information. I think a lot of colleagues will benefit from this.
Thanks, Mike. My pleasure. I hope so, because that's a lot of what, I'm trying to, the rest of my life, I can't do anything but my mission, which is to make this a world where people perceive problems as projects.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoy my podcast, then please subscribe, leave a rating and a review. Please visit my website, mikedelferro.com, where you also will find links to my other podcast, Self-Management for Musicians. You will also find links to my music and my socials. And of course, please share this podcast with anyone interested. Nothing beats the word of mouth. Thank you.